Hey guys, welcome back to Read Instead. I'm Jake. Glad to have you here tonight. I wanted to share my thoughts on the urban fantasy series by Jim Butcher called The Dresden Files. Let's talk about it. So, a few years ago when I started out on this reading journey, I came across a top 10 best fantasy series of all time video. Matter of fact, I think I came across a few of those. Just look around YouTube, they're pretty easy to find. Fantasy fandom and that genre when it comes to books and literature, it's a pretty strong fan base, which I appreciate. So I came across this list and this series was on it. And it looked different from every other series on there. I've mentioned this before, talking to you guys about the genre of fantasy. A lot of fantasy tends to mimic the Middle Ages, medieval times, with horses and bow and arrows and swords and dungeons and castles and kings and queens and all types of things like that. So when I was watching this fantasy series, this top 10 best fantasy series of all time, and I came across this one, and the background of a lot of these covers is the city. It's a city, and it's actually the city of Chicago. I was really intrigued by it. So eventually, at some point, I went ahead and picked up the first book, and the first book, all the way on the bottom here, is called Stormfront, and that came out in the year 2000. Let me tell you guys what this series is all about. Okay, so this takes place in present time and in the real place and area that we know. This isn't a made-up world or anything like that. It is Chicago, Illinois. And Harry Dresden is a wizard. That's what he is. He's an investigative wizard. And in this first book, in Stormfront, when you first meet him, he actually has an office in an office building, just like a private detective person would have. And there's a woman coming to see him and to ask him to basically dig up some dirt on her husband or a guy that she's in a relationship with. Very similar, if you guys have ever seen the movie Chinatown. Picture that, just not in 1970, but, in present day. That's where you meet Harry. And Harry obviously has something that normal detectives wouldn't have. He has some abilities because of his wizardry and how he was brought up. But I will tell you that those cases and the things that get brought to his attention throughout the whole series, everything that I've read so far, sort of has to do with, the paranormal. It has to do with other sort of fantastical elements. The woman wasn't coming to him just to say, "Hey, I think my husband's cheating on me. Can you get some information on that for me? Can you tail him or something like that?" No. People come to Harry and they say, "We believe that a crime has been committed and it was done by werewolves," or something like that. He has a few connections inside of the Chicago Police Department that know that there's sort of unbelievable things that occur. Most of the police departments sort of push it off and don't believe it, but there are a few inside, one in particular, who basically ends up becoming like his partner, his detective partner, his criminal, investigative partner. There's a few people inside the police department who actually know that there are sort of paranormal and outside forces that normal people don't really see and survey and believe in, you know what I mean? And that Harry Dresden, the wizard, has the ability to sort of counter some of these aggressions that happen within the city of Chicago. So I hope that gives you sort of the overall synopsis rundown of what this series is about. As the series progresses, that first novel, Stormfront, is really just like an isolated case where, the woman comes to him and Harry realizes that her ex is involved with some other sort of wizardry stuff. But as the series progresses, there were certain sort of monster factions that come in and become sort of characters within themselves. There are a number of different orders. There's like 3 different orders of vampires, like vampire groups. They're labeled by color, and they all sort of possess different characteristics and different personalities, and they have a different history and stuff like that. And they're all sort of they have like sort of a turf war going on within the city of Chicago, almost like the Bloods and the Crips or something out in L.A., or gang violence that takes place in a city. You have these different vampire clans that sort of battle, and Harry is sort of cooler with, he's tighter with this one over here, and this one over here he's like arch enemies with, and then this other vampire faction he's sort of just on neutral ground with. They're friendly with each other. They're friendly, and they let each other coexist. There's also another gang of, like, it almost seems like sort of punk street kids that actually end up being they're like werewolves, and a lot of times they end up helping Harry. And again, these they put all their uses as the abilities that they have as werewolves to use. Their smell and their obviously their strength when they change into the werewolves and all this stuff. Harry also lives. He has this sort of this very unique apartment that caters to him. I guess wizards. I learned this from the series that wizards and electricity, modern electricity, don't blend well together. So he lives in a very primitive apartment where he lights fires and stuff like that to keep warm, and just all this stuff. And then he sort of has a dungeon downstairs that a basement that with a trap door that he walks down into, and it's sort of his laboratory where he can make potions and stuff like that. And there's a skull that possesses a spirit that is trapped inside of this skull. The Harry actually calls the skull Bob. And Bob is sort of an encyclopedia. It's almost like Harry can't have a computer, but he does have this spirit living within a skull that can communicate with him and talk back to him. And that's where Harry gets a lot of his information on the history of this monster or that ghoul or whatever. Okay, so if you guys are following along, you know that this series it's not serious in some ways. It's sort of childish, to be honest with you. And I don't mean that in a real, like, derogatory way. Listen, I've read like 7 of these books, so if they were that bad, I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that they're childish in a lot of ways. A lot of fans of this series will say one of the reasons why they like it so much is because of the humor in it. To be completely honest, the humor doesn't really land for me. Harry is kind of very snarky, and he has a very sharp tongue, and the way he can come back at people is very, can be, I understand there's humor involved in it. It just doesn't land for me. I'll give you an experience that I had in reading. I believe it was the last novel here. This would be Deadbeat. I was reading it, and there's basically a scene where there is a museum, I believe it's called the Museum of Natural History in Chicago, where there is it's sort of a famous exhibit where it's a full fossil layout of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Maybe you guys know what I'm talking about. And basically there's this scene where Harry uses some sort of wizardry magic and brings this thing to life. This Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton, and he's using it to, like, travel around the city. This was actually a moment when I vividly remember sort of looking up from this book and being like, really? I just, like, is this what it's going to be? It was hard for me to, some of the things are a little too just, like, cowabunga, childlike. I can't think of a better word to describe it than childlike. You're probably asking yourself, Jake, why have you read 7 of these books? It doesn't sound like you like them that much. Well, no, they are enjoyable. They are. The way in which Harry goes about solving whatever crime there is, it's detective-like, and there are a lot of twists and turns that sort of you don't see coming. And it's just well-paced. It's a well-paced sort of detective investigative novel. They all are. They really are. And the other reason is because for me anyway, they're very low investment, meaning they're easy to read. If you guys watched my last review, I read a John Updike book entitled Rabbit Run, and I got to page 50 of that book, and I was contemplating not finishing it, which I very, very rarely do, not finish a book. That was very, very difficult reading. A lot of descriptive language, a lot of words and stuff. This series is not like that. These are books that you can finish relatively quickly, and it's just not a big investment. So therefore, that's why I've continued and I've gotten to book 7 in this series. To be honest with you, a lot of the serious aspects of these novels, this whole series, I enjoyed much more than the crazy, outlandish comic book like action that takes place, or the humor that takes place. I actually like, some of the relationships that Harry ends up developing with some of the characters and the heart-to-hearts that he has with them. Some people die off, and there's certainly a sense of loss and sorrow, and those are, thinking back, like, that's actually some of the aspects of the series that I enjoy more than I think some of the other things that most of big fans of this series really like. Okay, guys, so I hope I gave you somewhat of a rough layout of what the series is about. I hope, as I like to say, I hope I gave you a little taste of what the Dresden Files is all about. Will I continue with the series? Yes, I will. I actually have 2 or 3 more of the books right on the shelf behind me here. I will continue. One good thing, I forgot to mention this, and this is definitely worth mentioning. One good thing about the series is I feel like it gets better as it goes along, which not every series can say. Stormfront was okay. Full Moon, which is the second book, was like, I think I gave that 1 star. I think I have 2 or 3 books on Goodreads that have 1 star. Full Moon is one of them. And then they progressively got better. Death Masks was probably my favorite one so far. That's book number 5. So they get better. So I think that's sort of noteworthy. And I hear that a lot of, again, fans of this series, some of their favorite book in the series ends up being like the 13th book in the series or something like that. So I think I will read up to that point. You know what I mean? Am I dying to get back to it? Am I already lining up, when I'm going to read the next book in the series for 2025? No. But I probably will. I probably will read the next entry in this series sometime next year. Okay, guys, so I just wanted to, again, take this time to talk about the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. That's how I feel about it. I hope you gleaned something from this, and I hope, as always, you're reading something really, really good right now. So I'll check you guys later. Have a good night.